Hey everyone, it's Hannah Saber from HR Images. In today's video, I'll be talking to you about the best settings I use for wedding and event photography, so stay tuned. One question I've always been getting asked is, what are the best settings for wedding and event photography? What are my settings? What do I use? What focus mode do I use? Things like that. So I decided to put together a short video on going through the settings I use and why I use it. Now, these settings not necessarily may work for everybody, but it does work for me and for what I do. So I'm going to show you what I have set my cameras to and why I decide to shoot with those settings. So as a wedding photographer, two bodies is always an essential. So I use my A1 and I use my A7S III as my second camera. So the A1 I intend to use a lot with more like telephoto lenses, so either a 50 to a 135 and sometimes a 7200. Majority of the time I'll be setting my A7S III with the 24 or 35mm. Now, reason why I had specify in that sort of focal range is because it depends on the location and it depends on how much space that I have to be able to work with. So if I don't have much space, I will then mount the 24 on my A7S III and then I'll do the 50mm on my A1. Settings I intend to use throughout my wedding day. I love to shoot wide open because I do love the depth of field. So generally if I'm having a 1.4 lens, it'll be shot at 1.4. or an f2.8 lens, it will be shot at f2.8. When it comes to group shots, then I will then change it to around f4 just to get a variety of people more in focus, because the shallow depth of field, depending on where they're situated. So if you got like a 2-row people at f2.8, will have the first line in focus, but the back line not in focus. So generally I'll be at f3.5, f4, I will shoot a larger group. But throughout the time, I will tend to leave it wide open due to the shallow depth of field and being able to get that bit of creativity-ness with that depth of field. My ISO, I set it accordingly. So what happens is with the shutter speed, I keep it as a minimum of 1/250th of a second. I don't go lower because I want every motion to be frozen. I don't want to have motion blur. I don't want to have my subject looking like they're slightly out of focus, which is caused by the motion blur. By having those two set, then my ISO, I will then set it accordingly. So depending on how much light is in the house, the church, or the reception, I will then adjust it anywhere from ISO 100 to ISO 12800. Yes, I do shoot that high, and I generally do not intend to use flashes throughout the day. The only time I will resort to a flash is if I am in a reception and the lighting is really bad, where I do need a flash to help illuminate what's going on, the couple or the families or whoever I'm shooting. I will then use a flash, but I don't do flash to overpower the whole environment, just to be able to add a bit of light, just keeping that mood set how it's originally in reality. I like to keep that mood continuously on my photos. Shooting, like for example at the bride or groom's house, when I'm shooting detail shots, I love to shoot manual focus with the macro lens. Reason why I shoot manual focus is with the macro lens, you're having that shallow depth of field. So generally a lot of my macro shots are around the f4 to f8, adding a bit of light just to get the subject sharp, and also having the whole frame in focus opposed to having that shallow depth of field. Because with macro lenses, going close to like rings or watches or any detail shots, you intend to have wide open, will have that shallow depth of field. So I do shoot a narrower aperture, anywhere between f4 to f8 depending on what I'm shooting, and I prefer to shoot manual focus. With a lot of macro lenses, the autofocus isn't 100% accurate, so you will have a bit of hunt. So I prefer my images to be nice, tack sharp, so to be precise. Then I will switch my camera to manual focus for the macro lens, whether it's a 90mm or any sort of macro lens that I am using. With the A1, with the recent firmware update, what I have now set my camera with, once I press FN, you've got here image quality settings. So that is currently set in the FN menu. So then I can now change from large, medium, or small in terms of the file format. When I'm shooting throughout the day, I will then now start to use the small file, because realistically, clients aren't going to blow up the image. They're not going to say, oh, is that shot with a 60 megapixel or a 50 megapixel? They're going to care more about the results that you've captured that day. So I will shoot the at small. That way I am saving space on my hard drive as well as my SD cards. When I then go into location, I will then switch to large, because I know those location shots will be printed in a large print. So to give my clients optimal detail, I will shoot in large. That way I have room if I do need to be able to crop. So in my custom menu, you can set your custom key settings to whatever you decide to do. But for me, I have set my camera to where I have the wheel as a focus area, AF tracking sensitivity, switch left or right eye, and going to the top, you got face eye priority and subject select. So that's just more how I've set my camera up, just to show you on exactly what I want to change. So like, for example, ISO for unsteady shots. So if I just decide to be a bit creative in handheld shots where I want to go very slow shutter speed, I put on steady shot just to help minimizing any motion blur. And then you've got like your APC mode. So if I am shooting in the large file format of the A1, I will switch to crop mode to be able to get closer in terms of a crop. So if I'm shooting a 50mm and I use crop mode, it becomes an 85 equivalent. So I'll intend to change in that sort of sense. Now, when I'm shooting in the bride or groom's house, I intend to shoot more in focus settings. I'll be in wide, and I will shoot AFC. Reason being, I will have AFC set as well as wide, is that having those two set will work 100% very well with eye autofocus. So you want to use the 100% performance of the camera, and I found that's the best way. Now, if you use AFS or DMF, for example, and use the wide setting, it will catch, but with AFC, it will always track onto the subject. So as you're moving, having AFC and wide set, it will follow and always stay on the eye. I like to use that in the bride and groom's house. Reason being is because when I'm shooting the bride or shooting the groom, it's always the individual, and I always like to make sure their eyes are attacking sharp and focus. You want to capture the emotions of the bride, the groom, you know, who are you shooting at that time. You want to capture that emotions, and always generally the emotions are being told with the eye, the smile, what their facial expressions more than their body language. So you want to capture that. Where I will then change my focus settings. So at that time I'll be shooting wide, so I will change it to where I will be going tracking expandable spot. Reason being I do that is because when you're in a wedding, you will have a lot of movement, you know, different sort of movements going on. You want to follow the subject. So if you aren't really kind of tracking your subject in a way, they move out of frame, and you're using say AFS or DMF, the focus is going to be there. So if the bride decides to go backwards, doing a little dance or whatever movement they want to do, you will then not going to be able to get that shot in focus, because in weddings things happen in instant. It's very fast paced, so you do want to keep up with that. So then I will then intend to go to expandable tracking, expandable flexible spot. That way I can, when I hold onto the half shutter, focuses as the person moves side to side, the tracking will follow. So then I will be able to capture the shot, and no matter what, I'll be able to get that sharp and focused. Also, why I do that is because if I'm shooting a larger group, so for example, one of the shot here, this was at the church. I had the groom next to the groom, and then had the best man next to him. If you shoot wide, it will then sometimes doesn't tend to pick the subject you want. It will pick the subject the camera sees clearer. So then when it does wide, it could pick up the groom and not the best man and not the groom. So I will do the flexible spot. That way I can then choose where I want the focus to hit. So then I want it to hit strictly on the groom. That's where I will then shoot in that flexible spot, because then I can direct my camera to do it. Whereas wide, you're letting the camera pick the subject for you. Like for example, exchanging the rings, you will then have been able to point your spot. So here I had specifically done with the 7200, pointing the focus, the flexible spot onto the ring and catching the focus as he was putting the ring on finger. I chose that spot. Now, if I chose wide, it's going to choose the closest subject. So it will then choose her thumb opposed to the ring. So this is where I will then use flexible spot. Another thing I have set to my custom button, C1. So what I have set to it, if I press that button, it will say face priority autofocus off. What that means is, if you see this shot now, the brides, they put in the glass, they're doing a cheers, they knocking the glass together, smiling. When eye autofocus priority is on, it will always pick the eye up. So in order, even though you have flexible spot, the camera will still pick up eye autofocus. So you're not going to get the focus that you want. So then this is where I will switch the eye autofocus priority off. And that way, when I use flexible spot, I am focusing on the subject I want, which is the wine glass. I want them sort of blurred. I want that depth of field. So I want the wine glass in focus. I will then adjust, making sure the wine glass is in focus. The faces aren't in focus, is sort of have that bit of blur. If I had eye autofocus priority on, it will automatically pick their eyes and I'm not going to get the glasses in focus. So this is why what I liked about the Sony cameras, you can actually switch that feature off if you do not need it. And I have it set to my custom buttons where I can switch it off and on. So when I don't need it, I will switch it off. Another example is the bride's parents was helping tying up the bride's dress, and I had flexible spot focusing directly in the center, shooting right between them, having the bride and the mother and the father on either side. Now, when I had it set to autofocus priority, every time the father turned a little bit, the camera will catch its eye, so it would not catch where I want. So I will then have to switch that off to be able to focus directly on her dress, which gave me that nice shot, that depth of field. So this is where I will utilize that settings, especially when you're at the reception and you are shooting. I will switch off eye autofocus, because when you are in a large group, and I do not shoot wide in a reception, I will shoot flexible spot, whether you want tracking or just normal flexible spot. I prefer tracking. When you're on the dance floor, I want to focus on the bride, so I'll be focusing on the bride will be moving. Turn eye priority off, because sometimes it will then pick whatever face. So if someone's on the side, it will pick, and it's in front of the bride, it will pick that eye opposed to the bride. So to avoid that thing, I always switch that off, having the flexible spot onto the bride and just shooting her. So as she's moving, the tracking will follow her, ignoring what's around her and just focusing on the subject I am shooting, whether you are in the entrance or on the dance floor. And this is what I loved about. This is why I chose these settings specifically in terms of shooting weddings. With location shots, I will switch between wide and flexible spot, depending on how close I am to my subject. Whereas if I am at a distance, I will tend to use flexible spot, keeping AF on. So once the box is on your subject, it will automatically pick the eye up. So it does similar to what wide does, but always keeping it in continuous focus. That way you can use the camera at its full potential with the eye autofocus as well as the movement. That gives you just a quick rundown on the settings I use and why I use it. I hope this video helps you guys. If it did, please give it a like, share and subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell notification to get notified for future videos. I am going to try and get at least 1 or 2 videos out a week. So if you did want to keep tabs on what I'm releasing, make sure you hit that bell notification as well. Other than that, hope you guys enjoy and have a good night. See you guys.